This is Space Ants, Part 8, Sight of the Blind, an original composition by Eric Kay, copyright 2024. Their original home was a marble of white, blue, and green. Its dance with the red giant had been stable for unknown millions of orbits, but as is often the case with massive gas giants, it captured more mass. Perturbations unpredictably nudged their blue-green marble in, and the death timer began. There is no stability in chaotic systems. One is either spiraling out or in. There is no steady state. A colony either grows or dies, the egg hatches or the ant decays, life either reverses entropy or succumbs to it. Though their original moon died, its loss enabled their adopted ice moon to move into stable orbit. The ring would thin quickly and rain ice into the gas giant or the ice moon, or out to the black depth of space. Each action cemented the strength of the ice moon's orbit. Never again would their world be ripped apart by the giant's gravity well. In the meantime, the organic compounds which littered the ice ring spectrographically broadcast life here. It was a beacon 50% larger than the width of the largest gas giant, and unmistakable at interstellar distances. Old Lumina walked down their tunnels, lit with the faint glow of bioluminescence. In between her other duties, she was allowed time to search the black sky. Their colony, Farside, was near the anti-bulge, the point farthest away from their gas giant. During the middle of the eclipse, it was the darkest. Lumina crawled into a small, transparent dome. It was the bulbous exterior of a dead greenhouse ant. She let in a weaver, then closed up the room with a plug. In the center of the cramped room was a slope she could perch on. She viewed the heavens and wondered what all the specks of light were. Tiny suns? Tiny moons? Were there other ants out there? Typically, watchers scoured the sky for threats, and not during a full eclipse. Infalling material was a hazard, but not a worry. Instead, they kept watch for any enemy colonies who might crash near them. The exact middle of the eclipse approached, and the shadow squelched any light reflected off the ring. She could see an amazing array of stars now, even faint milky smudges. Lumina peered at a distant dim light. Out beyond the rings, beyond the other white ice light, was a different world, one ugly yellow and brown. They had known and recorded that world, which frequently moved in resonance with them. For every 2 times they went to eclipse, the pale yellow moon did too. Since the ice sheet was unbuckled from the planetary core, the shell drifted. Watchers recorded locations of other lights in the middle of eclipse, since that point did not wander. Small lines of silk ran over the top of the dome. Meanwhile, she used triangular tools to ease her calculations. The weaver complied by knotting the cord per her instructions, but Yellow Moon was not Lumina's goal. Tonight, she was interested in the location of the blue dot, an azure color which crawled along the sky so slow there was no resonance, or if there was, it was far outside of space ant math to calculate. Blue dot, Lumina told the weaver. The weaver put away the cordage for Yellow Moon. The weaver ran its antenna over a new thread, checking the name. Blue dot, its antenna confirmed. They would record the location on the right piece of silk this time. Lumina stood motionless in the center of the room and counted the number of silk lines leading, told the weaver, and then did the same for north. Lumina saw the yellow world right on time. It went dark as it began its short eclipse. Yellow Moon acted as a timer and a fixed point in their celestial geometry. Lumina watched the blue dot. The leading side of the Yellow Moon broke eclipse. She counted the silks and communicated the blue dot's location back to the weaver. And then Lumina became puzzled. Darkness unfurled. Nothingness grew and enveloped the stars and lights like an icequake to a pond. There was a disk of pure black, then suddenly a point of intense light appeared. It was like the sun, but not wide, a small pinprick of infinite light. Before she became blind, it was as though she saw everything, past, present, and something past the present, the future. Space-time folded, and a distant place merged with theirs. Whereas previously, the light had been 27 light-years away from space ants, somehow, something had for one brief instant combined the locales with a wormhole. What was far was now close. What was the future was now the present. In all wavelengths, at all frequencies, supercosmic energies were released in a causality spike. All events, which could happen in the intervening 27 light-years, were violently and explosively thrust on both ends of the wormhole. Alternate realities which might have occurred, all the plausible or potential, were instantly aborted. The power requirements for the temporal and spatial synchronization grew by an exponent of 3 for the radius of the wormhole opening, and even an advanced alien society could only push a small device through. The wormhole collapsed, and the causality of different space-times diverted away again, though they did not stray far. The small size of the hole determined how synchronized the realities became. The end effect of the energy spike was a burst of light, which flashed out and was dissipated by the square power law. But the ice moon and the few ants which had looked up at the night sky were bathed by blinding energies. Lumina saw a blue and green planet, like the homeworld they lost, next white moon, then the silver sphere orbiting their moon, and finally the intense white light. She was stunned. What did she see? What could she see now? Lumina ran her antenna over her eyes as though some obstruction was on them. Then she assumed she was suddenly underground in the middle of the deep night. She searched around and bumped into an ant. "Where?" she asked. "Cast?" The confused weaver ran its antenna over Lumina, wondering if it was some new ant, as Lumina should know who and where she was. "Dome, Weaver," she replied. "It dark," Lumina said. "No light." "Yes, dark," the weaver agreed. Weavers relied mostly on their sense of touch to tie the cordage and read the knots. Weavers were nearsighted anyway, and the small distant pinpricks of starlight were impossible for them to see. "Done?" it asked. Lumina now ran her forearms over her eyes again. "Yes." "New record. New light. Name? Silver Star. Location?" the weaver asked. "Everywhere. Record." For many moments, Lumina instructed the weaver and tried to get the weaver to record 6 orbits worth of ideas. Lumina tried to communicate a new concept which was neither now nor before. Prophecy, forecasts, or even a plan were not things space ants understood. Recorded events always happened in the past, as one could see in the saved cordage, but ants, including the hive mind, lived in the ever-present now, which was always a conceptual barrier. Lumina tried to get the weaver to understand. If the past were knots, and now, the next open space in front of the last knot, then how does one knot an event for the future? She eventually had the weaver tie a new line tangential to the long silk mainline. The anti-past, Lumina made up the new concept, but that was not a word the weaver understood. Lumina exited the room without providing more insight. She climbed into a nearby tunnel, the one with faint bioluminescence light, but Lumina could not detect it. "Tunnel?" she asked a passing worker, but the busy ant moved on. Most of the colony was asleep, waiting for the night to end. The few ants she bumped into could not help her. Muscle memory and smell returned her to her hutch. She was now certain of her blindness. She fell into deep torpor, like most of the hive, without thinking more. The night brought strange dreams. It was as though she was viewing her colony, with its exterior paths and piles of waste outside in the hard vacuum, but from an impossible vantage point. She floated until she saw the white moon. Speed increased, and the perspective grew farther away until she could see the giant crescent slice of their gas giant, with her white moon now a small gleam. The view widened still more until she beheld the full sparkling beauty of the rings shining in the sun, and even the yellow moon. Worlds now spun backwards in an unnatural direction. As her point of view went farther and faster away, the familiar sights disappeared. Then she saw her star, which she knew by color and intensity. It bathed their red giant in light, and its rings shined with the most beautiful scene Lumina had ever imagined, a scene she could never have witnessed. Then the stars themselves stretched into long lines of silk until they snapped back into points. Now she saw a white-blue sun, then a deep blue world with white clouds. There were hints of deep forest green on its landmasses. Green, that instinctual color of life. Lumina beheld it for only a moment, as everything happened in reverse, and her mind's eye whipped back through the tunnel of light until she saw her gas giant. The perspective slowed until the white moon dominated her field of view. Then she saw the silver star. She zoomed forward until it filled her view. Unlike any chunk of ice, unlike anything in the depths or the meteorites above. The sphere was smooth with one green glowing eye. The surrounding sky was black, as though deep underground. Then their local universe, the white moon and gas giant Lumina, had always seen unrolled, uncoiled. She did not have the right words, but it was like the ripples on a still pool. The silver sphere approached the white moon, and something grew off it. 3 white strands, silver like silk in the moonlight, but much thicker. At the end was a silver cylinder. It was not natural. The sphere was perfectly smooth, and other than the protrusion and the green eye, perfectly spherical. It shot an impossibly straight, glowing green line down at her moon, where a green dot bounced over the terrain. The moon's surface showed their greenhouses. Her perspective descended rapidly down to her observatory. Then she saw an ant, and the point of view struck the ant's eye at fatal velocity. Lumina's muscles tensed, and she awoke, startled. Alarm! She felt another ant. The dream ant recoiled. It stayed quiet in the blackness, but its antenna tried to calm Lumina. No alarm. The dream ant then left. Lumina moved her eyes around, but still saw nothing. Permanent blindness. She heard the familiar bustle of ants who had already started work. Lumina navigated back to her observatory by muscle memory. Still, she could not see. So she again tried to get her weaver to tie forward the locations of things as she saw in her dream. She dictated 6 orbits worth of forecasts. Regardless of how accurate any tie forwards were, Lumina could not hide the fact she was blind. Lumina now spent her orbits as an ordinary porter, laboring in the dark. A blind sighter was useless to her caste, but the colony could still use her. Sometimes ants grow old and lose their original job, but the colony finds work. Even queens could become warriors. Lumina carried bundles up from below, dropped them off to return the way she came, and passed the very same long line of ants who had previously passed her. The infinite loop of colonial work. Wherever her errands took her, to any ant which would listen. She spread the story of the silver sphere and how it will lead them all to paradise. One orbit, while she returned to a fungal farm deep underground, she felt a quake. Her fellow workers were tense and scurried to a place of perceived safety. Lumina stopped and measured it mentally by the way it made her hairs feel. Continue. Safe. She passed the message to her fellow laborers. She guessed a quake of that size was no need for alarm, because past similar quakes did nothing. Over the orbits she toiled in blackness. She had understood and predict which quakes were distant and safe, and which were wet and deadly. One workday, while Lumina was again deep underground, a signaler investigated her. It ran its long antenna over Lumina's useless eyes. Sighter? Yes, old. Lumina replied, trying to prevent the unasked question. What is a sighter doing in the dark? Lumina? Yes. Were there any other blind sighters deep underground? New job, the signaler instructed. Lumina did not care. Her sight could not be restored, so she might as well haul waste, or food, or dig, or any of the other jobs the colony needed. She was directed into a wide, cavernous farm with big, fat ants. When large tides fractured the ice, hydraulic pressure occasionally forced salt water all the way up and into their farms and tunnels. Salt hampered the growth of the microbes they were cultivating. To restore the farm's health, a large ant sucked up the excess salt water. Inside their bodies, they separated salt from water and excreted a very watery uric acid at a far lower salinity. The other byproduct, salt crystals, were excreted from an anal gland. Salt to central. The signaler instructed Lumina. All ants needed salt for neurons to fire, but it seemed the central hive always had an insatiable hunger for more salt. Another worker, a salt handler, gave Lumina a large crystal of salt to carry up. Affirmative, Lumina replied. At least this got her out of the fungal farms or salt mines. The long accent was uneventful. The sounds of a busy, healthy hive muffled the sounds of distant quakes of ice. Lumina carried her bundle straight to the core larder, a storage room right below the hive mind. Perhaps she could work here. It might be a position more befitting of her intellect. A guard stopped her. What? It tapped its antenna on her delivery. Salt. The soldier let her through. A very fastidious worker directed Lumina to the exact spot to place the package. Lumina put it with the other salt and turned around for her long descent back. The other worker scurried over, took the package, and placed it gingerly and precisely where she envisioned it. Before Lumina left the room, a signaler ant came and whipped her antenna at Lumina. Stop, she commanded. Lumina? Bug eyes are hard to hide, and a watcher living a life as a worker was easy to notice. Yes, Lumina was uncertain what the problem was. How could an old blind ant carrying salt elicit such notice? Come. Dreamer's question. Lumina found herself escorted up a wall and into a special chamber. There were a series of drapes which separated the dreamers from the rest of the hive. With every curtain crawled under, Lumina felt an increased warmth. There were other ants here, which simply generated heat in their gasters by combining chemicals with hydrogen peroxide. The exothermic reaction generated heat for the dreamers who lived warm in this room. The hive control room was large enough for several layers of dream ants to pile vertically. Small tunnels radiated into adjoining rooms, where scores of counters, the most specialized signalers, processed information. This was the hive's decision-making nexus. Lumina could see none of this, and the diffuse clatter did not give her a true sense of the room. Sometimes she was pushed and shoved by passing runners holding packages of knotted silk. The signaler hard to clear a path for them to get through. Such was the volume of messages being relayed. Stay here. The signaler ordered Lumina. She stood and then felt her body being inspected by many ants. Their antennas were relaxed and curious and did not alarm Lumina. Sighter Lumina, an old dreamer ant communicated to her in a friendly manner. Yes? Blind? Yes. The dream ant tested Lumina by shaking its antenna near Lumina's eyes. Explain cordage. The dream ant laid out the last recording that Lumina had dictated. The old dream ant, born the same orbit as Lumina, described their question. If the start of the cord was the past, and the unused length ahead was reserved for the present. What did it mean to tie another cord tangentially to that point? Lumina ran her own antenna over the older knots, up to where the side cord started. The dream ant observed. The past? It asked. Yes, Lumina confirmed. Then the dream ant and Lumina ran their antennas over the cord tied off to the side. Now? It asked. Not now. Past? No, none. What was not now, but also not the past? That question that confused the whole hive mind. The dream ant then reconfigured the cordage. One line, the main line, were knots observed by another sighter and woven accordingly. The sideline contained the observations Lumina had dictated all at once. The hive mind had recently read that same cordage document. It could not comprehend it. Instead of a single linear read of the cordage line, it had to organize two readers. Once they vaulted that intellectual hurdle, it still couldn't understand how a blind sighter had known precisely what was going to happen for another 6 orbits. Silver light orbits regularly, but side-cord from blind matches. The hive mind had thought to itself. The dream ant questioned Lumina. Name this. It demanded and placed Lumina's antenna on the side cord. Tie forward, Lumina suggested, trying to find a word in their impoverished lexicon. Better name, it demanded again. Antipast? The dream ant stopped. It rejoined the hive mind. In the adjoining room, Lumina could hear the busy tapping of many ants as they calculated. The hive mind struggled with the concept that the future existed and could be predicted. Their curt language, which lacked syntax and enough words, hampered the formation of ideas. The past can be recorded, the present experienced, but could the future be anticipated? Was it not so different from the kinesthetic instincts of drones, which in orbital days leapt from rock to rock by anticipating where the rock would be in the future? But Lumina's cordage was many orbits in the future. How had the blind sighter done it? It could not possibly have tied the knots itself. The weaver did that. It was not smart enough to think it up, and other sighters were busy with their own observations. The ant mind pondered more. How had the blind sighter's locations matched the observations of the replacement sighter? How could the blind sighter know the future from a fixed point in the past? Utterly confounding. The hive mind chewed on the concept like an ant sawing through an enemy with its mandibles. Take a dream, render it in knots as best as possible, tie it at a point of the side, and label it a tie forward. When now comes, let the sighters and weavers record what actually happens as per usual on the main line. Compare now to the tie forward knots made in the past. Space ants could now imagine the future, but did not know how to use it. Instead, the brain core stopped thinking. The central rooms would need to be remodeled for the hive mind to find a solution. Lumina was startled when the tapping sound of calculation died suddenly. The brain core disassembled, and many dream ants left the tight node and scurried around. Signalers and counters also left for food, water, or rest. One came to Lumina, inspected her with its long antennas, but asked no question. Uncertain what to do, Lumina tried to find some ant in charge, but there were no orders to give. She left and stood in line for food in a lower service room. Lumina ate in the company of others and used her antenna to communicate the story, the prophecy of the Silver Star. Most of the regular workers ignored her incomprehensible ramblings, but this upper larder had many of the higher castes who crowded around and waited to hear. Fevered twitches of her antenna poured out her pitches onto the antennas of others. How the Silver Star waited to take space ants away to a world of green and blue, from cold ice into the warm air. She also tried to explain the future, how it was space ant destiny to find the blue and green world. This continued as she returned to the microbial farms. She educated any ant which would listen to prophecies of the restoration of ancient fortunes of a world, of a thick, warm atmosphere which blanketed them under a bright sun, of rich soil where they could raise plants from seeds they collected. In her blindness, the mental image of the green and blue sphere kept her through cold nights and mundane work. Every delivery made was one parcel closer to space ants expanding back into orbit. Each crystal of salt kept the hive mind calculating. Each ant told might convert and proselytize her message, expanding it at a geometric rate. And the hive mind decided if and then how to get back into orbit. It had only vague ideas, but the overarching dream kept it thinking. Space ant colonies had filled the surface and dug deep. Now the only remaining direction was back up. It was a payoff so big, the hive mind justified any risk. The end. For now, at least. This has been Space Ants, Part 8, Sight of the Blind, an original composition by Eric K., copyright 2024. This audio has been artificially narrated by Revoicer. Subscribe to my channel for more Space Ants and hit that like button. It makes the ants happy and helps the colony get through one more orbit. You don't want space ants to die, do you?